you kind of never truly master something because there's always something to learn. You can get really good at it and you can always play consistently well, which I think is something everybody should strive for. But I think if anybody in anything really says, I have mastered this, they're kind of not looking quite far enough. So, as a drummer, I was fortunate enough to have a dad who was a drummer as well, and two older brothers who had already dabbled with the instrument. So I started about 7.5, 8 years old, and it was a very simple process of, here, learn this fill, learn this beat. But I think the most important part of the learning process for me personally is that I was encouraged to make other things out of what I was taught. And I think once you can play your first beat and you understand what sounds your hands and feet are making, you're able to then listen to another piece of music and kind of mentally put the puzzle pieces in place as to how to recreate that sound. You're pretty much off to the races. And I learned a lot from listening, and I learned a lot from being taught something here and there by my dad. Fortunately, as a kid, and I still do have very supportive parents, and because I took to the drums very early on and my parents recognized a natural talent for it, having that support made me realize that I could pursue it and see it as a career from the very beginning. So as of the age of 9, probably at the earliest, I thought, this is what I want to do with my life. By that point, I was already watching The Song Remains the Same daily and idolizing it and thinking, I just want to play and that's what I want to do. It never seemed like an obstacle or a barrier that I couldn't break through. That being said, with the support of parents, I was also taught very early on to treat it like a career and to be very professional at all times. So I always saw something as an opportunity that could lead to something else, or always knew that I had to play my best because you never know who's watching, just those things that everybody kind of should know. I always took it very seriously, even from a young age. I think my best advice for learning something would not be to focus in too much detail on nailing something perfectly as it's written on the page or as you hear it. Of course, that's ideal. That takes time and practice, depending on the difficulty. But really learning a piece of something while constantly maintaining the idea of how to implement it into your own playing. If you're learning a fill or a beat, you think, where could I put this in one of my songs or in one of the songs of my band or whatever it may be. I think that's always beneficial, and it also kind of helps you take in material in a more useful way, because when you appropriate something and make it your own, it's burrowing its way into your brain differently than just trying to recall something specifically as it was written on a page or whatever it may be. And I think that's the most important thing. I'm just being completely honest here. I was blessed with a good ear, so I learned a lot from listening. Now, that doesn't mean everything was precise note for note, but as your ear improves, you're able to kind of just make tweaks here and there. And I think listening to yourself helps you improve, because what you're hearing sort of in the moment is different to when you're critiquing yourself and listening to a recording afterwards. And these days, everyone has a recorder in their pocket on their phone. So I think taking advantage of that would be very useful in terms of learning and judging your own playing. And I mean, especially now, being able to slow things down half speed, definitely did not have that. So I see that being a great learning tool for people these days. You kind of never truly master something because there's always something to learn. You can get really good at it and you can always play consistently well, which I think is something everybody should strive for. But I think if anybody in anything really says, I have mastered this, they're kind of not looking quite far enough. I know struggling to answer this is making me look like an asshole. I'll tell you what, once my level of drumming got to a certain place, I realized it was either learning techniques and skills that maybe wouldn't find a use in the music that I enjoyed, so I started diversifying myself into other instruments. I think you should have something that is good enough to not hinder your ability to improve on it. And I do think it can be detrimental to learn on something that's too good for you, because then you don't appreciate it and you don't really have the next thing that you aspire to. And I've seen a meme or a cartoon of drummers and their first 3 drum sets. You have the basic one, Their second drum set has a million toms and cymbals, and then their third one is stripped down to the bare essentials. And I think that's pretty true. I mean, I certainly have less drums now than what I fantasized about as a 12-year-old. I've had a very similar setup, give or take a cymbal or two, for at least 20 years. I'm 35 years old now, and I had gone through the different setup changes as I was growing up and as I wanted more cymbals and drums, and then I kind of just pared it all down to a 5-piece. I'm missing a second floor tom that I usually have, but this is pretty much it. 2 crashes, a ride, and a hi-hat, 5-piece kit. And depending on what it is I'm playing or who I'm playing with, that will then indicate what I need to add to the set. So for example, Nine Inch Nails, I have 2 electronic pads on either side of me, an auxiliary kick pedal, some stuff I did with Danny Elfman a couple months back. I had these piccolo toms and these effects crashes that had the holes in them, which I'd never used up until that point. But it was part of what was required for the job. But if I said, I need a drum set, I'm gonna sit down and play, this would be it. John Bonham. He was and always will be my favorite. I really love the big band and jazz greats, Buddy Rich, Joe Morello. I can't say that I'm a connoisseur of the genre of music, but I feel that those guys and guys like them took the artistry of drumming and soloing to its peak. And I can just watch and listen to those guys play all day long by themselves, which, you know, the drummers I love listening to them play, but I love listening to them play in the context of the band and the songs. But people like Buddy Rich, Louis Bellson, they just played so well and were able to solo in such a musical way that it really impacted me at around 11, 12 years old, and really made me realize that, you know, the boring rudiments that you hear about that you should be learning, that's the greatest application of those things. And realizing that was a huge benefit to my playing, and it's something that I've incorporated within the music that I play, and any sort of soloing that I've done or do is very much a hybrid of the 3 things that I just mentioned. You take bits and pieces from these various players and styles of playing, and before you know it, you're mixing them in a way that ends up being your own style. And often enough, you kind of forget where the original seeds came from until you come back and you listen to those things. You're like, oh, that's where I got that, and I totally forgot. I celebrated my 21st birthday on stage with Nine Inch Nails. We were in Paris, so the 21st birthday isn't as important to them as it is to Americans, because 21 doesn't mean anything. But I was surprisingly flanked by 2 strippers on stage in front of a full, sold-out crowd. My parents were in the crowd. And then the said strippers proceeded to drop a cake on my head, and then the next song started, so I had melting frosting from all these Parcan lights on me. And it was funny, it was miserable, and it was awkward. Don't you kiss that